is Delegate Jones.
Give the stuff to you guys.
And I've got one more.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good evening. I'm here on House Bill 1132, which I'm sure you all might have heard a thing or two about in the last couple of days, certainly. First, I want to tell you what this bill does. It is very simple. It ensures that Dominion Energy's customers get a fair rate case in 2021. I turn 31 years old in 2 weeks. We have not had a fair, clean rate case in the state since 1992. We have had subsequent rate cases, but they've had some sort of caveats to all of them, and all we're seeking to do with this bill is, as we have this 2021 rate case, there is a fair, clean review. I want to tell you that this is the first rate case since 2015. This bill, I think there's been some stuff that's been put out there. This has nothing to do with offshore wind. This has nothing to do with solar, nothing to do with the renewable portfolio. This is about the base rate that customers are charged. Folks who stand to have their bills go down by up to $25, depending on the estimation. We've distributed some materials from the State Corporation Commission. Delegate Ware, who is my co-patron, I'm about to yield to him for a couple of minutes. And I have had several conversations and exchanged several correspondence with the State Corporation Commission asking technical questions and asking to clarify, because there has been some misinformation. There has been some sort of scuttle as it relates to what this bill actually does. This is about the little person. This is about protecting the consumer, protecting the ratepayer. We believe, and the SEC estimates, that Dominion has over-earned by about $3.5 billion, and that money belongs in the pockets of the people of Virginia. So I'm going to yield to Delegate.
Do you have proof of that?
Delegate Ware, I'm sorry, Senator, the letter that you have in your hand confirms that from the SEC, and I think the Attorney General's office would also confirm that too.
Go ahead.
It says 365 million.
Where do you want to?
Go on ahead.
Page 2, Mr. Chair, January 27, it says $1.8 billion.
All right.
What I was saying is on page 2 of the January 27 letter, it says 1.8 billion an over-earning combined with 1.6 billion over-earning between 2007 and 2018 adds up to approximately $3.4 billion of earnings between 1994 and 2018. That's a letter from the State Corporation Commission dated January 27, 2020.
All right, I'm going to take it that you at least know where that is in the letter, and we can certainly follow up on that as necessary. Thank you, Delegate Senator Deeds. Let me just note a couple of things, and then I know there are a number of people that would like to address this. Much of our time, and I don't have to tell this committee, during this session has been about the transformation of how we deliver energy in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We can and we have talked about exactly what the impact is going to be, but we know that these plan changes will have an effect on the ordinary ratepayer, and that's who we're focused on. The bill increases that will come without doubt from offshore wind, from plant closures, new projects will add the hits that ratepayers experience over the course of time, including such things in the past as undergrounding, smart meters, coal ash cleanup, things that a number of us have supported along the way. As we stand on the edge of this energy transition, I think it's important that we have a baseline, a level set of what our current energy costs to deliver. And our bill is unique in that, compared to everything else we're doing, it could actually lower bills for customers as a result of what is found. At the very least, it will give customers of all types, families, businesses, large industrial consumers of electricity, the assurance that the rates that they're paying are fair, that there's an underlying basis in cost and then a reasonable rate of return. You may have heard, and my co-patron alluded to this, you may have heard from opponents that this bill is going to hamper new projects, including those that we passed in 2015 and 2018, things like grid modernization and offshore wind that we're talking about right now. That is not the case, and I want to underscore that, because the heart of the opposition that we've heard, which is coming from one direction only, is that these things will be somehow, the promises that we've made in the past will be undercut by this bill. That is not the case. And that letter that you have from the SEC underscores that. You'll hear it from others as well. Neither of us, and I know this committee does not want to create doubt in the minds of business people looking at Virginia, looking to come here, looking to stay here. And this bill does not do that. It doesn't undercut any of these projects. One testimony to that is the range of individuals that we have in support of this. And you will see, and they're in this room, people from grassroots faith groups to the largest data centers in the Commonwealth of Virginia, from the left and the right. And again, the range is extraordinary. From environmental organizations to the Virginia Manufacturers Association. Why are they all in this together? Because we all win when the rates are fair. That's what our bill asks for. And I'm going to ask if, with your indulgence, we have a professor who has spoken on a number of these issues in a variety of states. He teaches utility law at the University of Richmond, Dr. Joel Eisen.
Those who are in favor of the bill might start lining up and be as brief as you can.
God, that's fantastic. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Joel Eisen, Professor of Energy and Utility Law at the University of Richmond. I want to pick up where Delegate Ware left off, that you're being told that this bill hampers Dominion's ability to invest in clean energy, and that's just simply not true. It's misleading, and they've said that they can offset money that they spend now on clean energy and prevent a rate increase in 2024. They're saying the only way they would invest is to take refunds that, let's not forget, would reduce customer bills and reinvest them in clean energy projects. But that the offset is only one of 3 cost recovery mechanisms that they have. They have rate base, rate adjustment clauses, and offsets. And so Dominion can easily invest now and seek recovery now in any of those 3 ways. This bill does not infect any investments under the 2018 law. Dominion can make those investments, it can recover now. This bill does not affect any investments required under any bill pending in this session, including what might be required under the Clean Economy Act. I want to say it's absolutely backwards to suggest that Chapter 10 regulation would hamper the development of clean energy. I've heard that it's antiquated. I've heard that it's something we left behind 20 years ago.
Okay, can you kind of move
I've
on?
studied, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I've studied grid modernization proceedings in dozens of progressive states. Utilities are building wind and solar and installing smart meters using this traditional regulation. Colorado, the state's largest utility, used a rider to build a big wind farm. That's the kind of thing Dominion could do here. This bill is a win-win. Dominion and the ratepayers get clean energy, and we get a process for setting rates that is fair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Will Cleveland. I'm an attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center. I want to thank both these patrons for this bill. And I just wanted to level set. Everybody agrees that Dominion is entitled to have charge rates that cover their costs. Everybody agrees that Dominion is entitled to charge rates that give them a fair profit. What they are not entitled to do is to earn an unfair profit. This bill does not guarantee any outcome. It guarantees a fair process. It lets the commission look at all the books, look at all the costs, and set rates accordingly, and set a fair profit accordingly. Now, however, it is true that Dominion has over-earned by about $1.3 billion just in the last 5 years alone. And the rate case that would happen is under Chapter 10. You've heard some people say that Chapter 10 is antiquated, that it hasn't been used since the 80s. Well, that may be true for Dominion, but every single utility in the Commonwealth, gas, water, electric, except for Dominion and Appalachian Power, use Chapter 10 today.
Mr.
It
Chairman?
works. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Spruill.
I'm trying to figure out, what do you call a fair profit?
Well, Mr. Chairman, speaking to the senator's question, a fair profit is established by the commission, who are expert in looking at all the costs and making sure that the utility is balancing its rates with keeping costs low. I am not in a position to say what a fair profit should be. The commission does that, Mr. Senator.
Thank you.
Okay, you want to move along?
Yes, Senator. All I wanted to say is I'm an environmental advocate. I do not believe this bill in any way, shape, or form jeopardizes the coming investments in clean energy, solar, offshore wind. We can do this, and we can do it in a way that's the least cost for the ratepayers. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Meade Browder with the Attorney General's Office. We represent the ratepayers, as you know. We support the Fair Energy Bills Act because it will provide the opportunity for a much-needed reset of Dominion's rates, as you've heard. The bill should in no way prevent Dominion from making and recovering all costs of its investments in renewable energy or other infrastructure under the 2018 Grid Transformation Act, or under any other new legislation that may be enacted this session.
You oppose that Grid Transformation Act.
Senator, we have, we did raise concerns with that, yes. Yes, I believe so, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
But it is now the law of the Commonwealth, and we're simply making the point that this law will not impair that. You may hear that the bill undoes the deal of that 2018 law, or that somehow upsets the predictability of the regulatory environment. Of course, as you know, the legislature makes changes in policy all the time from year to year. As you know, in this area specifically, there's been modifications and tweaks to the law going back from 2007, even back before that, the 1999 Regulation Act. I believe that there may be some attempted confusion on the issues here. Again, 1132 will not prevent full and timely recovery of costs from the Grid Transformation Act. The Grid Transformation Act does currently permit the utility to accelerate cost recovery, basically requiring.
Okay.
I'll try to speed it up,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman. It's a
please.
complicated issue. I'm just trying to make sure that the members are fully informed
There's about
of the issues.
10, 15 speakers behind you, so let's.
I understand. It does suspend one mechanism of cost recovery, but it does not prevent the utility from recovering all its costs. As stated before, Chapter 10 is used by all other utilities except for Dominion and Appalachian Power. None of those utilities are prevented from making critical infrastructure investments to ensure reliability. The bill will not dictate how the Commission conducts the 2021 review. In fact, it will do the exact opposite. It will allow the Commission to use the Chapter 10 process. Just finally, I'll try to wrap it up. I think you again will hear assertions that will raise concerns or intended to raise concerns about the bill and what it will do. I would simply say that there have been representations made before this body going back the last 10 years or so. You were told that you needed to freeze rates to protect ratepayers from coming environmental costs. That never happened. You were told that you needed to accelerate the recovery of about $400 million in North Anna 3 development costs to keep North Anna 3 moving. We don't hear much about North Anna 3 anymore. So again, I would just say that I would urge you to sort of question and be skeptical about maybe some of the criticisms you maybe hear about the bill. It's a good bill. Ratepayers deserve it. We ask that you report it. Thank you.
Next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Angela Navarro with the Governor's Office. We think that there are important issues regarding ratepayer protections in this bill. We'd like to see those conversations continue, and we'd like to see this bill pass out of committee today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Bob Shippey with Sierra Club. Throughout this session, I've heard many of you express concerns about ratepayers, and I think they're valid. This bill is the best way to address those, in our opinion. It's an important bill for Sierra Club, and you can expect to see it on our annual legislative scorecard later this spring. Thank you.
Good evening. Hi, Mr. Chairman. My name is Karen Twart. I'm from Mr. Sassaw's district. I'm an energy attorney. I'm here as a ratepayer of Dominion. Many times you're asked to consider very complex energy bills, but today this one's really easy. It comes down to this. If you vote for this bill, you're voting for ratepayers. If you vote against this bill, you're voting against them. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairperson, Senators. My name is Emily Little, and I'm a mother and I'm a nurse. I don't really fit in this room. Nobody's paying me to be here, and most of the time I spend with small children, nurses, teachers. They're not really here. And as I've spent some time in committee rooms here in Richmond, I realized that those are the voices that are not being heard in these rooms. The voices of nurturers, the voices of people who are taking care of their children every day. And I want you to take those people in mind when you make the decision about this. Because this kind of money for a small family with small children could mean the difference between having athletic wear for their children It could mean the difference between buying that new set of pencils for their children for when they start school, or for the teacher who every year supplies snacks for children who don't have enough money to buy snacks for themselves. There are lots of nurturers in this state who are spending lots of money that they don't have, and they don't have it because we're overcharging them in their utility bills. Please remember nurses, teachers, the people who will save your life, the people who will teach your children, and the people who will take care of you when you are old, that they too have rights and they too need this money, not just shareholders. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Vassey, CEO of the Virginia Manufacturers Association. We were a participant in the GTSA from 2 years ago. We understood what that bill was. I think all the agreements that were made in that bill have all been abandoned this session. So it took us a little bit of time, but as of last week, we came to the decision that this is a necessary provision within the context of all the bills we've passed over the last 3 years and the bills you're going to pass this session. And as a reminder, only about 51% of rates of costs are base rates. There's really no other choice of making any adjustments except for in fuel, and we just keep adding racks year after year. So we see this as an important measure. We understand the context. We appreciate your support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brian Gordon on behalf of the Apartment and Office Building Association and the Virginia Apartment and Management Association. For all of the aforementioned reasons, we support the bill.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Kenneth Gilliam, Policy Director for New Virginia Majority, and we strongly support this bill as for some of the reasons already enumerated, but also that we know that from the communities that we organize in, whether they are low-income communities or Black and Latino communities throughout the Commonwealth, that we know that they have to make hard choices when it comes to paying their utility bills. And we see this as a great opportunity to help protect those folks that we serve every day. And because too often folks across Virginia and this nation make key choices and hard choices about whether or not to pay their electric bill or making sure they put food on the table or paying their medical costs. So we strongly support this bill and urge you all to pass it as well.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Ben Hoyne with the Virginia Interfaith Center and Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, representing tens of thousands of people of faith from across the Commonwealth. What we seek and what this bill provides is a fair and just process. If you all want to lower the rates for your constituents, this is the best place to do it. So if you're concerned about bills of your consumers, of constituents, we urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Harrison Wallace, I'm the Virginia Director for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network Action Fund. We have 20,000 supporters around the state of Virginia. And for all the reasons you just heard, we urge you to support this bill. And the other thing I want to bring up is just that Virginia has an energy burden. The amount of people's income that they're paying for their energy bills is higher than the national average and continues to grow. This is a great opportunity for us to reset that.
Let me ask you something.
Yep.
Over the last several months, I must have Googled about 30 different spots and what's the average utility rate, electric rate, by utility, by state, by this. Consistently, there are 26 to 29 states with higher rates in Dominion. So are they ripping off their customers too? I mean, Massachusetts, as an example, is 23 cents a kilowatt hour. Almost double Dominion's. Are they ripping off their customers?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would answer that question by, as someone said earlier behind me, rates are 51% of the bills that Virginians pay. And when we look at how much people are actually writing checks for or paying online, that is 7th highest in the nation.
Well,
so
let me just give you an
lot.
example I'm familiar with. That's California, where my daughter and son-in-law and their family live. They have a 3,000 square foot house. Their bill is like $180 to $200 a month, which is about $80 to $100 less than that. And our house is 3 times the size. How do you account for that?
Mr. Chairman.
And they don't have, by the way, they don't even have air conditioning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I would step in and answer your question
and understand that when we're talking about the bill, right, there's your energy bill, the base rate.
She gave me her bill.
Is part of it, and I understand that this bill is about the rate case in 2021. Delegate Ware and I are not going to dispute, the rate actually could go up, right? We projected it to go down, but the rates are in flux, but all we want is for a proper assessment of the rate in 2021.
Okay.
Before 2024, this is the last bite at the apple because we can't do it next year.
Next.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Town, Virginia League of Conservation Voters. I'll be short. We support the legislation.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I represent Virginia Conservation Network, and we support this bill.
Thank you.
Madeline Kelsey, Food and Water Watch. We support the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Levy with the Data Center Coalition representing Virginia's data centers. We also support this legislation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Peter Anderson with Appalachian Voices. We support a just transition to a clean energy economy, and we support the bill.
I was wondering where you were. Welcome, Dana.
Mr. Chairman, sorry. Members of the committee, Dana Wiggins with the Virginia Poverty Law Center. So just a few things. So first, to your point about rates versus bills, rates are a very different thing than what you see in your bill, right? And so there are some states that have higher base rates, but their citizens pay lower bills than our citizens do. So that's, and we wrote a report, we hope you all read it, but we wrote a report to that fact just to help you understand that rates are very different from bills and that rates are only part of it. The base rate in particular is only part of the bill, as was already stated. And we definitely associate our comments with those of the Virginia Manufacturers Association in that there have been a lot of things that have happened over the last several years, a lot of big pieces of legislation, and we think that some of them are very good for people. But we also know that they come at a lot of costs, and for us, it's really important to be very transparent and to have all the facts in front of us and to have all of those things in front of us. So as part of that, I know that there's been, in some of my discussions with some of you before we got to this point, there have been a little bit of confusion around what this would do to the GTSA and what this would do to future projects. And for us, I think it's important to remember, somebody mentioned cash on hand to us and that this would impede the ability of the utilities to have cash on hand. And I think it's important to remember that, one, monopoly utilities should not have billions of dollars worth of cash on hand. That's just not how a regular utility system works. They borrow, our case from this past summer on the return on equity case is that they go to the market to borrow all their money for their projects. They're not using cash on hand for that, not for these big things, not for like all these projects from the GTSA. So this bill does not impede their ability to borrow money on the market. I know, and then it also makes sure that what this bill does is it says that we're going to have a transparent rate case where we actually delve into that base rate that hasn't really been touched in the last decade or more than a decade. And it allows us to have a fuller picture and actually balance things so that things that we have already paid for, power plants that have already been taken offline, things that we're still paying through the base rate for, those things can be reviewed and say, okay, that maybe should be taken out, but maybe something else that's a rack could be put in the base rate. It doesn't mean that the base rate itself will actually be less. It just means that we're going to have a more transparent view of where things are. And we think that's a really important place to start as we embark on this new future with lots of new things coming online. It's important for us to have crystal clear and a transparent system. We don't want a system where we don't know what things should be. We want to know where things actually should be. And we hope that in fact, will help the ratepayer have more confidence in the system that they're paying what they should be paying.
Okay. All right. Those with hold on.
Before we do that, let me just level set for a second for me, not to you necessarily, you can answer if you want. But we've sat in this committee after committee after committee, and almost everyone that's come up here has begged us to raise rates. Begged us to raise rates. Bill after bill after bill after bill after bill after bill, please. More solar, more wind, please. They can handle it. And now the same groups are here saying that they are here as advocates for the consumers. And I got to tell you, that's frustrating. That's really, really frustrating. I know we're going to hear more, but I tell you, that was quite a lineup. In my years, 29 years, I've never seen anything quite like that. Raise my rates, raise my rates, raise my rates, raise my rate, lower my rates. I've never seen anything quite like that.
Mr. Chairman, after we hear all of them, I'll probably pick up on the tagline of what Senator Newman has said, because I've been kind of involved in this for a few years, and I have a couple of observations I'd like to share after we get the balanced presentation.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Murray on behalf of Dominion. I'm going to tag team with John Watkins. I'm going to start by just addressing the 1990s. Delegate Jones likes to refer to when he was in preschool, so this is when I was in graduate school. While the commission, there were not rate cases in the 1990s because you all were looking at deregulation. However, as far as the commission's estimates of earnings or over earnings, what is being left out of that context is there was a fuel factor freeze that was adopted in Senator Norment's legislation in 2004. Dominion, until that was unwound some years later, absorbed $1 billion in fuel costs with no recovery. Similarly, in 2002, Dominion announced with the then Warner administration, spirit of full disclosure I was serving in at the time, that it would work with new source review. It would add back-end controls to coal plants. Those were hundreds of millions of dollars just for the scrubber at Chesterfield, for example. And again, those were done with no recovery because we're in a period of capped and frozen rates.
If you added up, just out of curiosity, the billion plus the others that you expended.
In the range of two, there were no RACs at the time. RACs were created in the 2007
Without
Act.
the recovery, what would that be to subtract from the?
The company's view would be that would, and I'm going to look at Joe Reed, who was representing the company at the time, that would be on the order of magnitude, if not more, than what the commission is asserting of overearnings at the time. Rather than relitigate the 1990s, though, with that context, you all have phones. Google EIA state electricity prices. These are all in prices. They're everything. You heard some reference to base rates. These are all rates. Whenever we express rates, it's riders, fuel, everything, and you can page down. Senator, you referenced New England. I'll pick out a couple highlights. Connecticut, 20.31. New Hampshire, 19.73. New Jersey, 15.24. These are cents per kilowatt hour for residential customers. Our rate, if our recent fuel filing is approved by the commission, is 11.5 cents. The national average is 12.69. You might say, well, rates versus bills. It is true that 2/3 of our customers heat with electricity. And in New England, very few people are heating with electricity because it's too cold. They're using oil or natural gas or wood for that matter, but primarily oil and natural gas. That doesn't show up on your electricity bill. Using this logic of rates versus bills, if you have a small apartment in Manhattan and steam heat, even though you're paying Con Ed twice our rate, somehow you're getting a better deal because you're paying twice as much per kilowatt hour in your 500 square foot apartment with steam heat in Manhattan. Our typical monthly bill, the average bill our customers paid in 2008 when the REREG Act took full effect was $126. As of today, if the fuel filing's approved, it's $127. The way we typically express our rates, a typical residential customer using 1,000 kW per month in 2008, it was $108. If this fuel factor filing's approved, it's $115. That's less than 0.5% a year over 13 years. Turning to the bill itself, the best argument against this bill is the actual text of the legislation. It purports to be a Chapter 10 case. Let's talk about Chapter 10. First of all, the fact you have a regularly scheduled date is not how Chapter 10 worked. Typically, the utility would bring a rate increase. The utility would bring a case when it wanted a rate increase. Refunds are not a feature of Chapter 10. They are of this bill because what the bill is trying to do is mix and match things people like about 3 different regulatory models. In the bill, I've just highlighted, and because my eyesight's not very good and the hour is late, 5 different times the phrase notwithstanding any provision of law or some functional equivalent is used. In the first paragraph of the bill, it's a Section 1 bill, it's not done, again, not done in a statute. There are 3 different aspects of regulatory models. There's a nod to the GTSA because it is in fact a triennial review. That's from the 2018 bill. There's refunds. That's a feature of the 2007 legislation. Refunds were not a typical part of utility rate making. They absolutely could be part of a settlement, but there was no backward-looking earnings test under Chapter 10. And then finally, the Chapter 10 sort of standard of review. The final thing I'll say before I yield to Senator Watkins, there's some testimony you heard about large costs, none of which are accounted for in the Commission's analysis of over-earnings, whether it's North Anna, which Mr. Browder mentioned, or whether it's Hurricanes Matthew or Irene or the derecho or the write-off of coal plants. Amortizing something does not make them free. Taking an expense all at once is taking it all at once. The amount is what it is. Amortizing it over time with carrying costs, it's kind of like people come to you budget conferees and say, you know, let's just do this with debt because then it's free. It won't have a general fund impact. That's actually not true. You got to put debt service in the budget. You pay more over time. Amortizing a cost does not make it free. It makes it more expensive over time. With that, I'll respectfully yield to Senator Watkins.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is John Watkins, and I'm here representing Dominion Energy. He stole most of my thunder, I think, but I would point out, I was here back in '07 as the chairman was, and Senator Normant and one or two other people in here. And one of the pieces of re-regulation that we were very specific about was we wanted to make sure that we could get as much power located here in Virginia domestically so that we didn't have to turn to what California has had to turn to. The thing that concerns me the most about this particular piece of legislation is we're going back to Chapter 10. That's where they started. That's where they've ended. That's why they're having the problems they're having right now. PG&E is in trouble, big trouble. And that's because they buy all their power, or most of their power, from somewhere else. Virginia took another tact. And excuse me?
Their PG&E is in bankruptcy.
Yes, sir. And paying big bills for fires along with it because the commission took away the maintenance money to put it in renewables in other places. And that's where the problem begins. And I think we need to be concerned about that here. Dominion is willing to step up with the scale that is necessary to do renewables in the right way. But if you undercut their ability to go in and use the funds to invest in those energy sources, it's going to bring about its demise.
Mr. Chair, could I ask?
Yes, sir.
Just a question. How does going before the State Corporation Commission to get a review of your rates, how is that undoing anything? What's unfair about that?
It's going back to Chapter 10 and using that as the methodology in which you're going to set rates, in which you're going to set refunds if they are refunds. It doesn't have racks in it. All of these new things are going to require the racks. And to say to the public that we're going to drive rates down, maybe the base rate will go down, but in order to afford all of the investments that are required for new energy sources, and the energy sources have changed since the 1980s. It used to be coal was the default, and we used gas peaking to top it off. There were no such thing as renewables then. It has changed. This is a different world, and we've got to be allowed to invest in that world at a scale that is affordable. And this type of legislation will make it unaffordable. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, John, I'm trying to figure out. We've got a letter here from the State Corporation Commission that says over a period of time, Dominion overcharged $3.4 billion and $1.2 billion was returned. If you know, I don't understand if you're saying it's going to take $2.2 billion to make the investment in a renewable economy. Say that.
Senator Deeds, I'd like to answer that if I may. First, we would dispute the figures for this reason. Okay. They're giving you part and not all of the answer. With all due respect to State Corporation Commission, for example, you all have recognized in law since 2007 an earnings collar, which is to say you have an ROE, you start tabulating refunds at a point. It's started in law, ended in 2013 it's changed to be 70 basis points, so 0.7% above. That's the first sort of omission from their calculation. The second is the way you do refunds. In Chapter 10, typically, there are no refunds. The way you all do refunds, 70% of our earnings above the collar are refunded. They're showing you 100%. That may be a policy you all want, but that's not what this bill does. The third thing I'll say is Chapter 10, if it's the approach that you ought to take, This is not a Chapter 10 review. It's a hybrid Chapter 10 review for one time. And in 2024, you revert to the GTSA. So if you think about sort of how this works, from 2018 to now, we've been managing to the GTSA. From 21 to 24, we manage around a hybrid review, Chapter 10 review with some features of the REREG Act in it. And then 2024, we revert to GTSA. In terms of borrowing the money to do all the sorts of initiatives folks want, what we look for is regulatory certainty. A bill that takes 3 different regulatory models in one paragraph, 5 notwithstanding state law, and then says, oh, never mind, we're going to revert to the 2018 way in 24 makes it difficult to do that.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to figure out what the problem with having the State Corporation Commission do their job.
We have a triennial review
that
under
is.
current law in 2021. This is changing how that would work for one case and then reverting to current law in 2024. We don't think that makes sense. And again, the best argument against the bill is to read the bill and read how internally inconsistent the bill is itself.
It's like changing the rules of the game, except it goes a step further. They're changing the score that you start from.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Bell.
Bill, and if you come back up, a question. Try to make this as simple as you can. If this bill passes, what happens to Dominion Energy?
Well, if this bill happens, since we would have to have at some point the 3 judges and then whatever review would go from there, interpret a Section 1 bill with 5 different notwithstandings and features of Chapter 10, features of REREG, and features of the GTSA, I don't know what would happen, and that's the whole point, is the uncertainty that the bill creates. If any of you can crosswalk all 5 notwithstandings in the bill and tell me, I know how to deal with a double negative, I don't know how to deal with a quintuple negative.
Mr. Chair, at some point, I'd like the State Corporation Commission to come up and maybe address some of the things they've got in their letter.
Mr. Chairman, one follow-on. I have a lot of data centers in my district, and it's been a business that's been thriving here. Can you tell me what impact you think this will have on our data centers?
I don't know what impact it would have on data centers. I will note that they've been thriving under the current law that this bill would unravel. And that I will make that observation. We've had tremendous data center growth under current law. And as I recall, the Northern Virginia Technology Council supported the 2018 Grid Transformation Act. I'll also note again, on the large expenses that are being disregarded in the Commission's analysis of our earnings, taking them out over time doesn't make them free, it makes them more expensive. So there was a member of this committee at one time who used to have the phrase money in the bank and bills in the drawer. This is looking at the money in the bank, not the bills in the drawer.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, can we hear the rest of, before they ask a question, can we hear the rest of the people testify first? But they'll never get there.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. My name is Bob Hevert. I'm a utility finance expert with 30 years of experience in the industry. I'm currently a partner at Scott Madden Incorporated in Boston, yes, Massachusetts. I've testified about 300 times across the country on utility finance matters, including before the Virginia SEC, and I'm here to oppose the bill on behalf of Dominion. My focus is on the disruptive effect of this legislation that could have in the capital markets. Utilities are highly capital intensive and they rely on the debt and equity markets to finance their investments. Dominion is no exception. In fact, Dominion has had capital investment requirements of billions of dollars a year over the past several years to serve its customers. And with the public policy initiatives before you, there's no expectation that pattern will change. Mr. Chairman, stability and predictability are essential to utility investors. They watch closely what is going on in the legislatures and utility commissions around the country. And if investors perceive a regulatory environment is eroding, that can inhibit utilities' ability to access capital or more likely increase the cost of that capital. And with a regulated utility, those higher capital costs ultimately are passed on to customers. Last year, Virginia was downgraded by a key analytical group that ranks regulatory constructiveness of the various states. And in my view, this legislation, which would dramatically upend a regulatory model here in Virginia that has been viewed as favorable and constructive over the past 12 years, has the potential to result in negative reaction by analysts and the markets. Given Virginia's public policy priorities and given the importance of access to capital and minimizing the cost of that capital to utility customers, I hope this body would be very reluctant to endorse such a proposal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Next.
Mr. Chairman, committee. Jason Parker, Building Trades. We think we're on a reasonable path to diversify the portfolio of energy sources that we got in Virginia. And we do have concerns about this bill's impact on that thinking.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Randy Dillard. I represent the Laborers International Union North America, and we do not support this bill. We are in a good trajectory right now, and we're going into an area that is questionable, so we ask that you not support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Barry Duvall. I'm with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce. We really support energy that is produced in an environmentally safe way and in an economically sound way. We also look to the members of the General Assembly in this committee to help us continue to maintain our competitive position in the global economy and in this country. Thank you for your pro-business support in the past. We recently achieved the #1 business ranking, and I would say to you that what businesses are looking for from this committee and from the General Assembly is stability and predictability and the opportunity to establish a capital improvement plan that allows them to do that. My concern with this bill is more the process and the potential unintended consequences that it might have in the marketplace. Thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Bob Mathias, City of Virginia Beach. Delegate Jones has stated that this doesn't affect wind, but we are very concerned about anything that would affect the ability to us to diversify the economy in Hampton Roads through a several $billion-dollar wind energy offshore Virginia Beach that's going to really ratify or modify the economy in Hampton Roads by creating thousands of, the governor said, over 20,000 new jobs in the wind industry, and we're just concerned that this bill might have a detrimental effect on it. Thank you.
You need to wrap up, and then we need to vote.
I just want to say one thing really quickly before we get to this. See, look, I'm born and raised in Norfolk. I want everything for Hampton Roads to be wonderful, and I would not be bringing this bill if it had any impact on the ability for us to do offshore wind. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay. I think Delegate Deeds, or Senator Deeds wanted you to.
I just wanted some explanation of the letters and whether, I mean, we've heard both sides of it, and I see the State Corporation Commission as an impartial arbiter to some extent, to a large extent. I mean, we count on you to give us accurate information.
And that is our job. And I'm here as an accountant, and I try to provide information so you can make an informed decision. And by the way, I'm Kim Pate with the State Corporation Commission. And Senator Deeds, you were asking about the accuracy, or somebody was asking about the accuracy of the excess earnings.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. If we turn to the letter, the first letter we talked about, dated January 27th, I'm just going to use as an example. The answer to number 5, the question was, how much has Dominion over-earned since the passage of the Regulation Act in 2007? And we quantified $1.6 billion. All right. So where did that number come from? That comes from the public record, actually. We had a going-in base rate case in 2009. There were earnings decided then. As a result of that base rate case, there was a rate case settlement, and about $725 million were given back to customers at that point of that base rate case. We've since had biennial reviews during that time. These numbers come from those dockets before the commission. If you want, I can provide you source documents for all of this. And in addition, when the rates were frozen with the transitional rate period, Dominion has actually filed what we refer to as off-year filings with the commission. So they have not been reviewed by the commission, but the rest of the number to get up to the $1.6 billion are Dominion's own numbers, unadjusted. No funny magic on my side type situation. So that's an example of where those come from. And I have source documents for all these. If y'all are interested, we'll be happy to provide those at a later date.
Well, Mr. Chair, down in response to number 7, in addition to the $1.6 billion, you identified another $1.8 billion?
Yes, sir. All of those are in docketed staff reports. Okay. Actually, I did all of those reports for the commission. I've been around a long time, shall we say. So I've either been involved in every one of these cases and all of these numbers, or I've directly supervised. And I have all the docketed numbers for those cases too. I don't have them on me now, but we can provide those at that time.
Mr. Chair, of that 1.6 plus 1.8, 3.4, in response to question 8, you say the total of 1.3 billion has been refunded.
That is correct.
Okay.
And also there were, Mr. Murray was talking about, well, it doesn't take into account additional expenditures for scrubbers. It doesn't take into account the not recovery of fuel. Actually, all of those numbers are included. All of those numbers, it's net of all of this.
So you're saying he's wrong?
Yes, sir.
And could I ask one more question, Mr. Chair? You've been at the State Corporation Commission for a long time. How many times over the last couple of decades has the regulatory structure changed?
Since about 1998, it's changed quite a bit.
And Mr. Chair, every change has been because of some legislation that's passed here. Is that correct?
The commission follows whatever the law says.
Okay.
So if the legislator changes and the law changes, we follow that.
And my point in asking that question, Mr. Chair, is because if we want to understand, if we want stability from a regulatory scheme, we come in here every couple of years since 1996 or so, we've changed the scheme.
Okay.
Okay. And there were just a couple more questions that I wanted to address. There was a question concerning the return on equity or the profit margin. What was the fair profit margin? I'm sorry, I can't remember who asked that question. But the answer is the commission just determined recently it's 9.2% return on equity is the fair market value. Now, based on the legislation, we've talked about it a lot, there's a floor. And so the actual floor is slightly higher than the fair market value determined by the commission. So actually, Dominion's authorized return because of that is more than the 9.3, a little bit more than 9.3% range. Now, as far as, I talked about the scrubbers and the fuel. As far as, there were a lot of talk about the rate adjustment clauses. The rate adjustment clauses will continue on based on the FEBA bill. Nothing changes with that. Just wanted to make that clear. They don't go away until 2024. They're still here. We have rate adjustment clauses in front of us now, and they will continue on. And again, I think I said it a few minutes ago, but as far as the scrubbers and the fuel and not recovering it, all of those numbers are net of that. If they had had the fuel recovery mechanism or they had had riders for the scrubbers, the excess earnings would have actually been higher.
All right. Senator Edwards.
Yeah, I have a question to SCC. This bill is kind of strangely written with regard to these notwithstanding this and notwithstanding that. Can the SCC figure this out by reading it?
Yes, sir.
That's not going to be a
We do
problem.
understand the bill. What we would do is we would do a normal Chapter 10 rate case, other than there would be potential refunds. That could happen. The commission's dealt with refunds in the past. Like I said, in the last base rate case back in 2009, refunds were a component of that case too. So we do understand that, and we understand that how it works, yes.
And Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, the rate of return, 9.2%, that's the base rate, and that does not include the riders, the extras.
The 9.2% is for all of Dominion's recovery. When the law says that once the commission sets a return on equity, whatever the return is, that's to be applied to the base rate cases, for the triennial or biennial reviews, and also for the rate adjustment clauses. So that's a continuing across. And when we talk about the rate adjustment clauses, those are dollar-for-dollar mechanisms. They're dollar-for-dollar mechanisms. The company actually recovers its cost and is guaranteed to recover its profit margin on that. Sure. Only in a base rate case is the profit at risk.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, follow up on that. So what you're saying is the base rate is one thing, the adjustments is actually a cost plus.
Well, they're both cost plus a profit margin. It's just at base rates, you have the opportunity to recover your costs in the profit margin, where in a rate adjustment clause, when we talk about the offshore wind, we talk about the solar, we talk about all these different items, that's guaranteed recovery from customers. But at the end of the day, customers pay for everything anyway. It's just a matter of what mechanism.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Jesus Christ. Yeah. Senator Marston.
Thank you. Did we get a total bill of the amount of money, things that you did not recover on, expenses that were not recoverable? Did we get a total on that?
Senator Marsden, as I said, those numbers actually included the scrubbers, any depreciation, any recovery of the cost is included in our excess earnings. The numbers will be higher if they had recovered them through a rate adjustment clause. Those are included. They suppress the earnings. Earnings are lower as a result of that recovery. It's included in our numbers. You just can't see it, but it's in the numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman? I'm
Bill, she just questioned what you had said before, that they were not, that they were included in, it was a net, including that. Is that, let's say you.
Mr. Chairman, we'll turn to the letter. Number 7, it should be noted the Dominion Energy Virginia reported a different level of over-earnings during the period. None of these cases were litigated. None of these reports were litigated. I can simply say, and I led with a caveat, I was not working at Dominion at the time. I was in graduate school when this period began. Having said that, my understanding from I've been told the correct figure is $1.8 billion in fuel costs company absorbed during the frozen fuel factor. Riders were not created until 2007. There was a rider for APCO in the 2004 legislation Senator Normant carried. Riders are an artifact of 2007 legislation. They're not part of traditional review. What I will say, and what I have been working at Dominion, is in terms of the over-earnings or the alleged over-earnings during the period we're discussing, the Commission's letter is not accounting for the 70-30 earnings split from what I can tell. And again, I'll be happy to look at the backup data. The earning effect of the earnings collar in amortizing an expense does not make it free. It makes it more expensive.
All right, the bills before
Mr.
us.
Chairman,
We need
Mr.
to-
Chairman,
Senator Speaker.
one thing. I'm not here for the mayor or anybody else, but the mayor of Norfolk, Kenneth Alexander, came up here today. He also asked to come to our caucus, and he asked members, no party asked members that please do not vote for this bill. Now, I represent Norfolk along with Senator Lewis. So I'm saying, so I represent Norfolk and Chesapeake. To me, I don't care what they say out there. My city, and one of my mayors of my city who came up here today and pleaded to us and asked us not to vote for this bill, and that's what I'm gonna do.
Second.
Thank you.
All right, there's a motion and a second to report.
Substitute motion, Mr. Chairman.
Substitute motion.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to my friends that I have great respect for, I'm going to move to pass it by indefinitely and speaking to that motion.
Is there a second? There's a second.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, as I've listened to both sides present testimony, I've heard about the notwithstandings, and I despise notwithstanding language because we're never entirely certain what it means. It appears to me, based upon what Delegate Jones said, that there's not going to be any accurate forecast of what rates would be. As a matter of fact, you said they may go up and they may go down, and I respect that, so I don't say that confrontationally. It's contrary. I've been in the midst of this for many years. It is contrary to what we decided in 2018. Yes, I respect that the marketplace has changed. We went through deregulation. We went through re-regulation. We have been through it all. And it very clearly commingles Chapter 10 with some other provisions in the code. But here's what we haven't talked about. And I'll just be very direct about it. As I have sat back and observed during this session, the environmental groups and lower income groups have done their absolute unequivocal best to bend Dominion over in every way imaginable. And that's nothing new. I am old enough to remember a guy by the name of Henry Howells who said, let's keep the big boys honest. And I think about this. We have legislation that is passed in some instances that are going to cap the percentage of electrical rates that lower income people will have. Nobody's capping my rates, but we passed that legislation. We passed just tampering legislation, which I promise you is going to cost money, but because of the process that's gone on, there's a determination to eliminate every instance of fossil fuels and carbon footprints. I used to lay in bed and look out my master bedroom window and see the glow of Surrey Nuclear every night. And then there came a time where I didn't only see the glow, but I saw trellises coming up in the James River to bring nuclear energy across the James River into the service area that was being challenged because they were closing down a coal-fired fuel plant. And now the environmentalists want to come in and try to put Dominion in a situation saying that the permit should have never been granted and to revoke those permits. And I cannot tell you what the billions of dollars are going to cost, but that's another uncertainty. And I could go on and on and on. But what we don't know is I think in the General Assembly, many times, all of us, we tend to look at things in a silo. Legislation comes in front of us in a particular committee, and we focus on that, but we might not be sitting on a corollary committee that's looking at things. I have not seen one person, I have not seen one paper, white paper, that has put together all these bills that are working their way through pertaining to energy this session, and to tell me what the aggregated cumulative impact is going to be on the industry or on the raters. We don't know. We don't know. And so the basis of my motion, Mr. Chairman, is not so much being adverse to these very fine gentlemen, is that I think we need to take a deep breath. I think we need to wait and address this next year and see. So we
can't do it next year, Senator.
Jay, don't shake your head. I haven't entitled my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. And I'm very respectful of your opinion. You were well educated, so I got great confidence in you.
No, he was my professor. He's making a joke.
Thank you, Jay. That was not a dig at him. He and I know one another. And I just think that we are moving in a too expansive, too quick pace when we don't know what the impact of all this is going to be. And I'm very respectful of what you all are trying to do, very respectful.
All right, it's before us, the substitute motion is to pass by. Definitely. All those in favor of the motion, vote aye. Those opposed, no.
Ayes 8, no 7.
Bill is passed by indefinitely. Thank you. All right, let's see.